So good afternoon and welcome to the 2014 recognition reception. Before I get going too far into the program, just wanted to give thanks out to Mary Jane McMahon and Denise Gauthier for the great food. And the easy swaying tunes of the John Michaels Jazz Band. So, and the sun even came out for us this afternoon, which is okay. We can clap for that too. Which is a great sign because we have approximately 49 honorees today. So we have a fantastic group of people. We want to recognize service. We want to recognize all that they've done for the East Longmeadow Public Schools. And everyone who's in education knows that the last month is probably the fastest paced, and it's a frenzy every day to accomplish everything and feel that you're supporting students in the way you did, say, in the first month of school. And yet we do it exceptionally well. So it's a good time to slow down and actually recognize a number of people for their fantastic service to the East Longmeadow Public Schools. So without further ado, let me introduce the ELEA President, Eliel Gonzalez.
I want to congratulate all of those who are being recognized today, and I'm looking forward to presenting to you right now with deep admiration and respect the only two-time reflection speaker at this event, Mr. Larry Sherpa.
Well, a few weeks ago, Eliel asked me to speak, and I was a little reluctant to do it, but how do you say no to Eliel? I asked him what I should talk about when I first did this speech, and he said, your remembrances. And so since the only memories I have are my own, and at the risk of being more than a bit egocentric, I'd like to share some memories and anecdotes with you as I reflect on my 43 years of teaching in East Longmeadow. It's actually 43 years and 2 months, as you'll find out. I'm speaking to you today because in the fall of 1970, I was awaiting a letter from my draft board. I put my name on a substitute teacher list in East Longmeadow. I never got drafted. It was the only lottery I ever won. But I never got called to sub in East Longmeadow either. In May of 1971, long after I had totally forgotten about East Longmeadow, I got an early morning call asking me if I wanted to sub at Birchland Park. I never really heard of Birchland Park, and at the moment, it sounded to me like it was either a playground or some sort of mental institution. Little did I know. I asked what subjects I would be teaching and was told that it would be for mechanical drawing and metal shop. And I was told quite clearly that it would only be for one day. I'd taken mechanical drawing in high school, and I figured I could fake it through metal shop. But I did need that $22 that I would be paid. And so it's just for one day, and I said yes. 1 day in the shop became a month, 1 month became 2 months, and 2 months has turned into 43 years. I applied for a social studies opening that fall, and apparently the Birchland administration was impressed with the fact that no student had lost any fingers, hands, or arms using that scary pre-OSHA regulation equipment used in the Birchland metal shop. It was scary equipment. The man who hired me was Stu Krapser. Stu Krapser was a Navy vet, no-nonsense kind of guy. He went by the book, but he hired me anyway. When I got a call from Birchland Park that I was hired, I decided I had to clean up my act a bit. I went shopping with my then girlfriend and now wife of 40 years for shoes, socks, ties, shirts, pants, and I also decided to get a haircut. Now remember, this is 1971, and up to that point I'd been trying my bell-bottom, tie-dyed best to look like a hippie. I got my hair cut, went to Birchland, signed some papers, and told that I had to go to the central office to meet the superintendent and sign my contract. I entered the superintendent's office, introduced myself, engaged in some pleasantries, and at last I signed my very first contract. As I handed him the contract, Dr. Porter leaned closer to me as if he was about to say something profound, and I leaned in to listen to him. And he said, "It doesn't matter to me, but I think the people in this community would want you to cut that long hair." A bit taken aback, I said, "Yes, sir." I couldn't bring myself to tell him that I'd just gotten a haircut a few hours before. I didn't get another haircut right away, and I always got a little bit nervous when he made his infrequent visits to Birchland Park. Hair was very important in those days. Later that year, I applied to be the assistant hockey coach and was basically told by the athletic director that my hair was too long to be a coach. Things were very different back then, but I've learned my lesson. I got a haircut yesterday. And so the teaching career began. A bit of historical perspective may be in order. In the early 70s, gasoline was about 36 cents a gallon, cigarettes about 40 cents a pack, and a nice house in East Longmeadow would cost you about $30,000. After President Nixon's wage freeze was lifted, my first year's salary was raised from $5,800 to $6,300. In my mind, I was rich. I'd gone from an unemployed hippie wannabe to a full-time teacher in East Longmeadow. And believe me, no one was happier than my mother. In my mind, I was rich. I decided to buy a new car, but not just any car, a brand new shiny red Ford Pinto. The dealer asked me if I wanted the standard model for $1,900 or the deluxe model for $2,200. Hey, since I was clearing $100 a week, I decided to go with the deluxe model. I could afford the $60 a month car payment. Little did I know that would be my last new car purchase of the 20th century. Over the years, I've seen many changes in the field of education, particularly in the field of technology. When I first started, if you want to make copies, you had to bring your master into the office secretaries who made copies for you on the only mimeograph machine in the building. You'd drop off your master copy, they would smile and say, "We'll get to it." And with luck, 2 or 3 days later, you had your copies neatly stacked on the office counter. Eventually, a mimeograph machine was put in the teacher's room so you could make your own copies. However, if you ever worked one of those machines, you might remember the frustration of seeing that master copy over which you labored be chewed up and destroyed in the machine, forcing you to start all over again. My first year on the job, I, like everyone else, computed grades by hand. Pencil and paper, addition, multiplication, long division. It took a solid weekend to work on grades. I can remember my excitement when I decided to buy my very first Texas Instrument calculator. It was expensive. It cost about a week's salary, but it was well worth it. Of course, now you can buy the same calculator in the dollar store. Today, of course, we're very high-tech: projectors, computers, printers, DVD players, TVs, the internet, high-tech copiers, smart boards, and so on. Some of you who have been teaching for a while may remember the territorial battles, having to sign up months in advance to use the lone tape player and television in the building. Yet amidst all the technology of today, as I look back, in the old days, what would really excite the students was colored chalk. Some of you are nodding your heads, you remember. You'd wash your chalkboard, clean up the chalk dust, use colored chalk, and you'd have their attention at least for a while. As you gained experience as a teacher, you learned to pad your supply of colored chalk and always have a stash on hand. From colored chalk to internet smartboard projection, I'm very fortunate to be in a position to see where the art of teaching has been and where it is going. One of the great joys of working in East Longmeadow has been the wonderful colleagues that I have worked with currently and over the years. Today, as in the past, I work with dedicated, creative, hardworking teachers who do their very best for their students. I do remember a time at the old Birchland Park, before the schools were alarmed, and when just about everybody had a key to one of the many entry doors in the old building, In the off hours, teachers would come and go as they needed to, in early, stay late, and work at Birchland Park on weekends. Occasionally, I would go in on a Sunday afternoon to get some work done, and whenever I did, I was not alone. In every stage of my teaching career, I have worked with some remarkable people with a variety of backgrounds and experiences. People who have enriched their teaching with their military, business, professional, domestic, athletic, and artistic backgrounds. I've had the honor of teaching with many who proudly served their country during the Korean and Vietnam War eras, and more recently with teachers whose children have served in Afghanistan and Iraq. Yet my mind keeps returning to 4 teachers of the greatest generation, the World War II generation, with whom I was privileged to work. The principal who hired me was Stuart Crapser. Mr. Crapser was a Navy pilot during World War II in the Pacific. He was cited for bravery at the Battle of Leyte Gulf during the liberation of the Philippines. Charlie Amos was a science teacher. He had the misfortune of being stationed with the Army Air Corps in the Philippines in December of 1941. Only 18 at the time, Charlie spent the next 3.5 years as a prisoner of war of the Japanese. Walter Kuhn was a social studies teacher who, after graduating from high school, spent the last months of World War II in a unit whose mission it was to hunt down fugitive Nazis in Germany and Austria. Estelle Krause was an English teacher whose husband was aboard the USS Missouri and witnessed the Japanese surrender at the end of World War II. Like many women of her generation, her husband was sent to fight in one war, and 20 years later, her son was sent to fight in another. These were 4 of the kindest and gentlest people you could ever meet. They rarely shared their wartime experiences, but when they did, oh, the stories they could tell. None of these people thought that what they did was remarkable. I did. I taught history. They were a part of history, and these were people I worked with every day. It was an honor to be in their presence, and I hope I honor their memory today. I only hope in the years of teaching, I've inspired my students to appreciate and respect all of those who have been called upon to defend our country. On a lighter note, we've all heard the saying that you will know when the time comes to retire. Now that I'm an expert, I'd like to share a few tips with you if you're thinking about retirement. You'll know it's time to retire when? You'll know it's time to retire when your age equals the combined ages of your principal and assistant principal. You know it's time to retire when you realize that both of your sons are older than your principal. You know it's time to retire when you realize that you were your principal's age in 1982, and he'll be your age in 2044. You'll know it's time to retire when there is no longer a column for your age, nor a row for your years of experience on the retirement chart. You'll know it's time to retire, as in my case, I keep referring to Mrs. Bianchini as Mrs. Finnegan. They're both great math teachers, but Mrs. Finnegan retired over 20 years ago. And you know it's time to retire when, rather than taking the stairs, the elevator starts to look real good. As the years pass, the students stay the same age, but the parents who at one time seemed so old now get younger and younger. You do reach a point in your career when you have students or the children of former students. And I usually mention this at Parents' Night, joking that when I get the first grandchild of a former student, I'll know it's time to retire. You know what's coming? Last year while I was on lunch duty, walking among the tables, I noticed a student who I did not know, smiling at me broadly. He seemed to know something that I did not know. I approached him and asked him, what are you looking at me like that for? And then he told me. His grandmother had been a student of mine. I couldn't believe it. I assumed this kid was just yanking my chain a little bit, having some fun with me. I said, "What was your grandmother's name?" And he said her name, and I remembered the name. And in disbelief, I went home that night and did the math, and it was true. He was the grandchild of a former student. And if you've been teaching for a while, you also know you reach a point in your career when you get to stare. I usually get to stare at the coffee shop in town, but it can happen anywhere. An adult will stare at you. They'll slowly approach. "Are you Mr. Sherpa?" And then they say, "Do you remember me?" But what they're really thinking is, "I thought you'd be dead by now." After I assure them, and indeed I am Mr. Sherpa and that I'm still very much alive, they seem astonished that I was still teaching at Birchland Park. We briefly reminisce and go on our way. This next story you won't believe, but I have a witness. My wife was there. Marcia and I attended a retirement seminar hosted by the Mass Teachers Retirement Board in October. There were about 20 teachers in attendance. At the conclusion of the meeting, I got to stare. You gotta be kidding. A man approached me and asked if I were Mr. Sherpa. Long story short, he was a student of mine in 1971. I was 21 and he was 15 at the time. He was now 59 and a Springfield teacher hoping to retire. You know it's time to retire when you meet a former student at a retirement seminar. 43 years and 2 months is a long time. 8 presidents, as best I can recall, 11 principals. We did have 3 in 1 year, and an ever-changing social studies curriculum. I wish they would just leave it alone. Nothing makes a teacher happier than to see the success of their former students. I'm proud to say that many former students are now on staff at Birchland and elsewhere in the system, and a number of former students hold elective office in town. There's so many memories in so little time. I had 1 year as vice principal. I coached the ski team for 10 years with Pat Bean. And if you know Pat Bean, you know there wasn't one dull moment in those 10 years. Our first ride up the chairlift, we got called into the ski shop. One of our students had just been arrested by the Holyoke police. That's how we began our ski coaching career. Oh, there are a few other things that come to mind. There was the night during Parents' Night when we had a power failure and the lights went out. The following day, we were all issued flashlights. Okay. And in the past, I've worked with some tremendous people like Jim O'Hearn and Art Moses and Dick Roskuska and Lenny Palmer, Ann Rutherford, Gene Finnegan, Gene Burnett, Linda Golash, Pete Andrew, Ronnie No, Eddie Matulowicz, Phyllis Jerusik, Jim O'Hara, Mikey Kelly, Dick Francis, and on and on and on. And I work with some great people now. I really thought the golden years of Birchland Park were behind us. But I can honestly say, with the dynamic leadership of Tim and Connor, that the best years lie ahead. I wish I could be on board for a few of those years. These guys are energetic, enthusiastic, intelligent, and compassionate. And I want to thank them, I think, on behalf of all the retirees at Birchland for making our final year as stress-free as possible. I do have to tell you, though, I barely made it here. I went into the restroom at Birchland to change up, and I came out of the restroom and went around the corner, and there was Tim Allen racing a bicycle in a time trial, apparently, and I almost got wiped out. But I still had a few moves. I was able to get out of the way and make it here tonight. Now, I've been through a lot in 43 years, and I could not have survived the trials and tribulations of these years without the love and support of my wife, Marcia, and she is here today, and I want to thank you. Just want to wish congratulations and a long and healthy and enjoyable life to all of the retirees. And I want to thank you for your indulgence. By the way, if anybody wants any colored chalk, I got some. In the end, you know it's time to retire when it's time to retire. And when you reach that point, the only thing left to say is farewell.
Thank you, Larry. That was a fantastic speech. Tim Connor, do you agree? This part of the program, we want to honor years of service. And so our first group of people have served the East Longmeadow Public Schools for 20 years. Our first honoree is Janet Bianchini. Only 48 more pictures to go. Our next honoree is Cindy Como. Our next honoree is Linda Costa. Our next honoree is Connie Frater. Our next honoree is Trish Hafey. Our next honoree is Susan Jackson. Our next honoree is Diane Lucier.
This is the way it's supposed to be, right?
Our next honoree is Marianne McCauley. Our next honoree is Donna Moore. Our next honoree is Chris Norden. Our next honoree is Chris Ovett. Our next honoree is Nancy Paulides. Our next honoree is Despina Piculis. Our next honoree is Kelly Phillips. Our next honoree is Ralph Potito. Our next honoree is Mary Jo Rainier. Our next honoree is Cindy Savoy. Our next honoree is Kim Turnberg. Okay. And our final honoree for 20 years of service is Jane Tyler. We have a round of applause for all our 20-year honorees. Now we're going to recognize people who have served the East Longmeadow Public Schools for 25 years. And our first honoree is Deb Barry. Our next honoree is Kathy Saletti. Our next honoree is Kathy Daly. Our next honoree is Peggy Jelinas. Our next honoree is Larry Humison. Our next honoree is Anne-Marie Jagodowski. Thank you. Our next honoree is Allison Johnson. Our next honoree is Eric Schmidt. And our final honoree with 25 years of service is Carla Shea. May we have another round of applause for our honorees for 25 years of service. And now we want to recognize our staff members who are retiring and have given so much to East Long Meadow Public Schools. And there are a few of them. Our first honoree is Andrea Brewster Gray. Our next honoree is Joan Claffey. Our next honoree is Mary Collins. Our next honoree is Kathy de Bonville. Okay. Our next honoree is Nancy Donofrio. Our next honoree is Catherine Fernandez. Our next honoree is Joan Flahive. Our next honoree is Connie Frater. Our next honoree is Cecilia Gilbert. Our next honoree is Geraldine Martin. Our next honoree is Tina Moore. Our next honoree is Deborah Nimitz. Our next honoree is Chris Ovid. Our next honoree is Liz Plazik. Our next honoree is Patty Richards. Our next honoree is Linda Roca. Our next honoree is Larry Sherpa. Our next honoree is Carla Shea.
Let's go for it.
Okay. Our next honoree is Shirley Skiffington.
What's it show that was? 12 years? 12 years? 13 years? Oh, more. 41?
Is that? Our next honoree is Marilyn Ulick. And our final honoree is Julie Vukovic. All right. We have another round of applause for all of our honorees. Just an incredible amount of service hours in this room right now. It's incredibly impressive. We thank you, we love you, and to our retirees, we wish you the best as you go on to the new steps and adventures in your life. Thank you. Oh, I'm told we have more refreshments in the hall, so please enjoy and stay as long as you like.